David Holt is the president and founder of Consumer Energy Alliance. He has almost 30 years of experience working for state and federal agencies and Congress and directing outreach and advocacy efforts. David founded what became HBW Resources in 2005. He serves as president of the Consumer Energy Alliance, a trade association that focuses on expanding the dialogue between the energy sector and the rest of the economy. David regularly authors op-eds and appears in national media outlets. He's a frequent speaker. He's a great friend of mine. I'm excited today that he's going to moderate our panel. We also have Peggy Montana, who's the retired CEO of Shell Midstream Partners. Ms. Montana was at Shell between 1977 and 2015. She served in various capacities in the downstream and midstream sector in her career. She served as Executive Vice President of Supply and Distribution from 2009 to 2014, and most recently took Shell Midstream public in 2014 and retired in 2015. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from the University of Missouri-Rolla. We also have with us Eileen Campbell, who retired after 22 years with Marathon Oil Company. She's held positions of Vice President of Human Resources for 10 years and Vice President of Public Policy for 3 years. Eileen is a graduate of the University of Michigan Executive Human Resources Program and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Political Science and Economics from the University of Maryland. And via Skype, we have Alex Epstein, who's the author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, an expert on energy and industrial policy. And he's not in industry. Called the most original thinker of the year by commentators John McLaughlin, he champions the use of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas, and that it's changed thousands of people's lives to think about energy. He's risen to prominence of the nation's leading free market energy debater, promoting a philosophy that is anti-pollution but pro-development. I would love to welcome Alex. We're going to watch a video very quickly before he starts with his opening comments.
We were told our fossil fuel usage would bring ecological disaster on a cataclysmic scale. Earth was supposed to be uninhabitable by now. Yet, life is better than ever. People around the world have climbed out of unspeakable poverty. By any measure, our environment is better than it's ever been. This, all powered by coal, oil, and natural gas. But how? How could the experts have been so wrong? Not only wrong, but hysterical and reactionary and rude, stifling progress in the process. I'm Alex Epstein, founder of the Center for Industrial Progress, and I have a question. Isn't it time someone made the moral case for the use of more fossil fuels? Wind and solar power remain unreliable. Fossil fuels burn cleaner and cheaper than ever to advance our growing world. They save lives in operating rooms, fight famine, heat and cool homes in the most extreme places. Without fossil fuels, society slides backwards. It's good that we use fossil fuels. Our world would be better if we used more. We can no longer deny the big picture, the real picture. The truth must be exposed. The time is now. It's here. The moral case for fossil fuels.
Yeah, it's exciting to be here. And I think I have about 15 minutes. So I really want to focus on one core idea, which is how to be an influencer for the cause that you're part of as part of this industry. So whether you're in the industry or not in the industry, in a sense I'm outside the industry, but regardless of that, presumably or properly, you're involved in this because you believe that it's right. And the fact that it's Super Tuesday indicates a broader truth that's going on right now, which is that we are in the midst of, I believe, the most important energy election this century. If you look at the possible outcomes, particularly for the hydrocarbon industry, you have on the one end the possibility of drastic, forcible restrictions, which is the agenda of the whole Paris agreements. And then on the other side, you have the potential of actually liberating hydrocarbon development around the world. So this is a huge difference, and the consequences for human life will be hugely different depending on which one of those paths we take. And certainly if you're in the industry, the consequences will be very different. The focus today is often on the price of oil, the price of gas, understandably, but the lower the price is in any market, the less margin for what we can call regulatory error you have. So if oil's at $100 a barrel, you can deal with quite a bit of government control and still keep your job, still make decent money. But if it's at $30 a barrel, it's a very different kind of situation. You don't have the same margin for error, and thus any kind of fracking war against you, for example, can be the difference between a company surviving or not. So for many reasons, it's important to be an influencer. And what do I mean by influencer? I mean somebody who can influence many other people in the direction of his or her beliefs, in this case, beliefs about energy in general and hydrocarbon energy in particular. So if you know how to become an influencer, you can influence dozens of people, you can influence hundreds, even thousands of people. I believe that's a realistic possibility for anybody who is committed to it. But to do that, to be committed, you need to really understand what is the key to being an influencer. And I have a different view of this than most people have, so I want to share with you my view and the what I think are the components to it. And to first illustrate and justify my view, I want to give an example of a group of influencers in the hydrocarbon industry who had a lot of influence and then whose influence completely disappeared, because I think there's a big lesson there. And this group is the coal miners. So historically, the most powerful group of influencers, arguably in the hydrocarbon industry, and indeed one of the most influential in American industry, were the coal miners. If you tried to lower the wages of the coal miners, you were in big trouble. And it would get a lot of national attention, and they would rebel, and they would go to protests, and the nation's opinion pages would be talking about them. They were influencers. They could shift a national conversation when they were under attack. But when they were under attack financially, when their wages were challenged, that in particular. Now, look at what has happened, though, in the past 8, 9, 10 years in particular. We had a presidential candidate who later became president, Barack Obama, who essentially pledged to destroy not 10 cents or 20 cents off an hour of a coal person's wage, but to destroy that entire industry, talking about utilities going bankrupt if they were to use this evil material to generate energy. And what happened to this group of influencers? It was physically basically the same group of people, but did they rise up? Did they have influence? No, they didn't. They were mostly silent. When they spoke, they were not very efficacious. So what's the difference? It's the same people, the same potential for influence apparently, but very different levels of influence. So I think there's only one explanation for this, and that is with the issue of their wages, they had something that they didn't have with the issue of the very goodness of their product. Because with their wages, they were confident that, well, we're the workers, we deserve more than we're getting, we want to stick it to the man, that kind of thing, that kind of narrative. They had a moral narrative they were confident in. But with the issue of the goodness of their product, there was a narrative in the culture that said, what you do is a self-destructive addiction. Your core product is evil. And they had no answer to that. So what they had with the wage issue that they didn't have with the product issue was moral clarity. And my view is that the ultimate cause of being very influential is that you have moral clarity. And that means you yourself understand and believe in the goodness of what you do to a very high degree of precision. And therefore, when you interact with other people in any realm, be it one-on-one communication, be it speaking to a large audience, be it interacting with people on social media, you will be able to explain things in a way that's very compelling to them because you can just share with them what has convinced you. So one comment I'll often get is that, hey, Alex, it's easier for you because you're outside the industry. But I think that the truth of that is a little bit different. The truth is that because I came from outside the industry, I had no pre-existing incentive to have a sort of half clarity about the goodness of it because I didn't believe it was good in the first place. I had to be 100% convinced myself. But whether you're in the industry or not, you have to be 100% convinced yourself. And once you get convinced to that degree, you'll see your whole life will change in terms of your ability to influence others. So one big motivation of creating this book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, was to give my best understanding, the thing that led me to moral clarity on this issue, and to efficiently share it with as many people as possible. Now, I'm not sure whether you have a handout from me or not. I hope that you do. But in any case, if you want more information on these ideas, including the first chapter of the book and some other resources you can hopefully use and share, just email alex@alexepstein.com. So that's alex@alexepstein.com, subject pink. So that's that way there will be some follow-up materials that will help you understand these concepts better and share them with the many people who obviously aren't here. All right, so the core issue is moral clarity, and I just want to indicate what are the core elements of being clear on this issue. So just very briefly overview, and then we'll get to the panel. Three concepts that I think are really important, and I call them big picture thinking, energy production, and environmental improvement. So big picture thinking, energy production, and environmental improvement. So big picture thinking is something that is completely missing from the discussion of fossil fuels. When I started studying this, because my background was as a philosopher, I very quickly noticed that the way we discuss this issue completely violates the idea that we should think big picture, which means that we need to look carefully at the positives and negatives of all the alternatives. Because I noticed that when we talked about hydrocarbons or fossil fuels, we only looked at negatives. And when we talked about the so-called renewables, particularly solar and wind, we only looked at positives. So that indicated to me a big bias in the debate. And not only was there this bias, but there was this incredible tendency never to be precise about the magnitudes of positives and negatives. So for instance, with the climate issue, it's never made very clear when you talk about climate change, whether you mean sea levels are going to rise by 20 feet, like Al Gore says, or 20 millimeters, like some people say. But that's a huge kind of difference. And it's the same thing. Is it that fossil fuels are just a little bit cheaper than solar and wind, or that they're vastly superior? Depending on how clear you are on those things, fossil fuels could either be an absolutely moral choice or an immoral choice. So you have to think clearly about that. So my goal in thinking about the issue was to bring this big picture thinking to this question of energy in general and fossil fuels in particular, so I could have an idea what we should do about our energy future. So that's big picture thinking. Now, with big picture thinking, the kind of takeaway, the takeaway question we have is what really is the big picture of using fossil fuels versus restricting fossil fuels? Because that is this huge choice we face this election. And that really means, what are the unique positives of using fossil fuels versus not using fossil fuels? And what are the unique negatives of using fossil fuels versus not using fossil fuels? And to do that, we need to look at the realm of energy, and we need to look at the realm of environmental quality. So that goes to the concepts of energy production and environmental improvement. So with energy production, there's a key idea missing in our discussion about energy, which is that all energy has to be produced by a very involved process. So this is really important. Energy is always produced by a process. often our discussion of energy just talks about the raw material. So they talk about solar, the sun or the wind or coal or gas, but that's not the usable energy. That's just one of the raw materials. And if you just think of it in those terms, you think, oh, coal, that kind of looks dirty and the sun looks clean. But what about the whole process of producing them? It's possible that the process of harnessing the sun's energy could involve much dirtier stuff, at least on the front end, than producing coal does. And from an economic perspective, it's even more dramatic, because sometimes people will think, oh, well, solar, that must be free and forever. That's what Al Gore says. But if you look at the whole process, you see, well, if we're trying to take an intermittent or unreliable stream of energy and convert it to reliable energy, that could be very, very expensive and difficult to scale. And it turns out that, as I've explored in the moral case for fossil fuels, that the scalability of cheap, plentiful, reliable energy for energy production, for that process for fossil fuels, is incomparably superior to solar and wind, which I don't believe should be called renewables. They should be called unreliables. And in general, the most controversial forms of energy, and the most opposed, which are fossil fuels, nuclear, and hydro, those are all opposed by the green movement, which indicates that it doesn't really care about CO2 emissions. Those are all far, far more efficient processes for producing energy than are solar and wind. So the reason that solar and wind are privileged is for ideological reasons, not because they're an efficient process. They're a very inefficient process. They're privileged because it's viewed as natural, which is there's a whole perspective that we should be natural. That should be our goal in life, often called green. And my perspective is that, no, we should be humanitarian. We should do what's best for human beings, and that includes a good environment, but it includes the big picture of human well-being as a whole. So that we've got big picture thinking, we've got energy production. Then the third concept, and I think the most novel in the book, and the one that, as I formed it myself, was the most groundbreaking for my own thinking, is the concept of environmental improvement. And this is a concept that is completely absent from today's discussion, or at least has been until maybe the last couple of years. And this is true of industry. When you look at an industry, a company's environmental impact statement, all it does is talk about the negative ways in which the company impacts our environment. And then, of course, it says, well, we're less bad than we used to be. And the basic premise behind this is that the environment or nature is something that starts out perfect and then we mess it up. But I think if you look at this empirically, this is not at all true. Nature, the environment, doesn't give us a good standard of living at all. It doesn't give us all the usable resources we need, and it has lots and lots of major threats. Climate is naturally dangerous. Nature gives us amazing amounts of disease, gives us amazing amounts of environmental contamination. Nature is wildly imperfect. So when we think about the impact of a form of energy on our environment, we need to obviously look at any negative impacts that it has, but we also need to look at the positive impacts it has in allowing us to transform imperfect nature into a far better place to live. And empirically, what we discover if we do this is that the environmental impacts of using fossil fuels are far more positive than negative. So you see very interesting statistics, such as our safety from climate has never been higher, because we've had a mild warming influence on climate, but really we've had a huge, huge safety influence on climate, because we have things like air conditioning and heating and sturdy homes that enable us to deal with the naturally dangerous climate with all of its viciousness and volatility. With pollution, it's the same thing. We've never lived in a cleaner environment. And with resources, it's a similar thing too. We've never had a more resource-rich environment, because having this caliber and scale of energy allows us to create all sorts of new resources from nature, and human ingenuity allows us to continually expand the amount of usable fossil fuel resources. So if you get these three things, if you get that the moral questions are decided by big picture thinking, that that's the right way to do it, and then you get that hydrocarbons and the hydrocarbon industry involve a uniquely good and scalable form of energy production. And if you get that they involve that energy production also creates these overwhelming environmental benefits, not just risks, then you will conclude overall, you'll have the framework to see overall that there is this amazingly overwhelming moral case for fossil fuels. And I think if you get this basic framework, you'll see that you yourself feel a different way. You feel more intensely, more clearly about the goodness of what you're involved in. And the way you can convince others is just totally transformed. So again, for more information, email alex@alexepstein.com or fill out the handout. You can just put subject pink so I know what to send you. But I think the two key things we can help with are one, this book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, I think is a very efficient way of learning the big picture. And then we also have a video series called How to Talk to Anyone About Energy, which tells you how to use the framework to persuade just about anyone. And I use this every day. I use it on Uber drivers, family members. I have a lot of fun and a lot of success persuading people about these issues, but it all comes down to this basic moral clarity, which comes down to the framework I gave you of the big picture thinking of energy production and environmental improvement. So with that, I really hope you choose this time in history to get involved, to become an influencer, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime election. I know it's easy to say that, but I 100% believe that, and I'm investing a lot of my time accordingly, and I hope you join me. So thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to the panel.
Excellent. Can you guys hear me? My name is David Holt. Alex, thank you very much. If you have not read Alex's book, I really commend you. Really commend it to you. It's excellent. It's well thought out. It's a good philosophical examination of a lot of the issues that we'll discuss further on the panel. I like Alex's. Well, and also I want to, Katie, great job with all the Pink Petro staff pulling this together. So I think this is my second or third time to speak at a Pink Petro event, but congratulations to you. Thank you very much. So I love Alex's kind of philosophical perspective, which is always fascinating to me because I look at everything in a political public policy prism. So it's kind of the flip side of the coin. And ultimately, it comes down to the key word of influence. And kind of as a framing question, just to kind of get our panel teed off, and I encourage everyone to raise your hand, and we'll try to get as many questions in as we possibly can. Looking at it from a political perspective, the public policy perspective, how did we get in a situation where it became this either or, frankly, in my opinion, false choice that pits the environment versus energy production? How did that occur in history? And all of us as kind of thought leaders in this space, how do we begin, as Alex talks about, being our own individual influencer to change that discussion? Because in my opinion, from a global perspective, it's wrong. So Peggy, I start with you. Just a simple softball question there.
Yeah, I think.
I'm glad you're going first, Peggy.
How did we get here?
I'm just going to leave that.
I think most people have heard the acronym NIMBY, not in my backyard. And that's pretty much how people think about it. And if you think about it, it's not just unique to our industry. Everybody likes their cell phones, but they don't want the cell tower in their backyard either. But we have been really sort of painted as the villain in the story. And I think it is because, to Alex's point, there isn't a balance there. And people accept where we are today. We got here, and I think they accept the argument that they got here because of the riches of the energy capability that it brings to humankind. What they don't like is what they think is going to happen going forward. And so that's where you start talking about transitions and the alternatives. But the alternatives are a false choice because, for instance, as simple as pipelines. Well, we're not going to build Keystone. Well, the stuff is going to travel anyway. And pipelines are 99.997% safe. So do you want that, or do you want it on a truck rolling by, a school? And so we don't ever talk about the alternatives to what's being put forward as the bad thing to stop. And that's where the conversation becomes fairly illogical and frankly emotional. But it is about dealing with real world problems. And I just think at the end of the day, it comes back to most people aren't very educated about the industry or the issues. I mean, I will ask you guys, online and in the room, how many people even know what the Paris Agreement says? Show of hands. Anybody who's looked it up?
No.
Four hands in
Yeah.
the room.
Anybody who knows what the Clean Power Plan is? A few more. Well, about the same. So, I mean, if we're not educated about it and it impacts our industry, what do you think the average human being is doing out there? They are not paying attention. They're going to the soundbite. The soundbite is, this is evil, this is good, and so we will stop this and we will do this. The Clean Power Plan, to Alex's point, I'm all for reducing emissions. I don't have any issue with that. What it says is, well, we're going to kill coal, but also, you know, these things like natural gas, which reduce emissions completely, or not completely, but significantly, and hydro and nuclear, we're going to restrict the use of those too, so that it can be more wind and solar. Well, just tell us what the target is. Don't tell us how to get there. So long answer, sorry about that.
Plenty of time.
And I'll play off of Peggy. Your soundbite point is spot on to me. We become a society that we want everything instantaneously. We're lazy. We're all going to go to the polls today, hopefully, aren't we? Or you've already voted. That's really important. And I apologize for those listeners that are not in the United States, and I hope that you go to your polls because it's very important. But we want to pick a candidate on a 30-second commercial, or now on a tweet, or thousands of tweets. And what research is, as Peggy said, what do we do? Do we spend time understanding where our candidates stand on issues that are important to us in our industry, for our livelihood? Do you know where the candidates stand, whether Republican or Democrat today, on energy? Whether it be fossil fuels, hydro, nuclear, power generation, renewables, whatever. Do you know where they stand? I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands because I'm sure most of us don't. But I think that is what has caused it. Alex and David, you've asked the question, what has caused us to move into this? We really don't want to get into the depths of issues. We want it instantaneously. I mean, I'm a little older than the millennials. I'm in that baby boomer generation that Regina talked about a little bit. But what scares me is I've got two daughters who are millennials. They don't read a newspaper. They get their news on Twitter and on Facebook. That's not news, that's opinion. That is, they're being lazy. And they're both bright, successful women, have successful careers. But we as a human race, and getting to your morality issue, Alex, is we're cheating ourselves because we don't want to take an hour out of our day and you don't have to read the paper. I don't read the paper anymore. I read the paper. Okay? But you try your darndest. And even our papers and our news medias have failed us. And we've allowed that. We've encouraged that. We love the fact, I go back again to the days of Walter Cronkite. Where is Walter Cronkite when I need him? What we get is opinion. So what I do, I read the New York Times, and I read the Wall Street Journal, and several other things in between. Because particularly having grown up in this industry, nothing they write about is fit to print about my industry. The stuff that's fit to print about my industry is in that last paragraph at the very bottom, that if the phone didn't ring or somebody didn't ask you a question, you got to. Because the first 5 paragraphs were all very negative on our industry. As Alex talks about, as David talked about, they're negative. They only talk about one side of it. Is this industry perfect? Absolutely not. And as Peggy said, do we all want to make it cleaner? Absolutely. But what do we need to do to make it cleaner? We need energy. We need efficient forms of energy to make it cleaner. And that's where fossil fuels, in my opinion, come in.
Alex, anything to add?
Sure. The echo is fun.
Technology.
So to address the core question, I need you to mute me. It's crazy. I sound like the Wizard of Oz. Okay, great. To address the core question about how is it that there's this apparent conflict between industry and environment, I think we have to look back to the history of ideas. Historically, the environmental philosophy that existed was what I call a humanist environmental philosophy, and this is what I subscribe to. So the basic idea is that the goal of everything in life is to maximize human well-being. So we think of environmental issues from a human perspective. We want to improve the planet for human beings. And by that philosophy, industry is not only compatible with a good environment, it's absolutely essential for a good environment. When people were settling the frontier, they were making the environment much better for human beings. But in addition to the humanist environmental philosophy, there is also the anti-humanist environmental philosophy, and this is the one that has dominated since the 60s. Now, while this philosophy cashes in on our very legitimate concern with minimizing pollution and also maximizing our enjoyment of the natural world, the core of it is really anti-industry, anti-development. And we can see this in its term green, because green means minimize our impact on nature. But if we minimize our impact on nature, we can't make all of the improvements that we have to make to survive and flourish. And if you just really try to apply the principle of being green, ask yourself, well, if we could go back and decide whether to take a patch of dirt and trees and turn it into New York City, what would be the green thing to do? Well, obviously not do it. Or if you're considering having a kid, or if you've had a kid, is that the green thing to do? Well, obviously not. The Sierra Club tells us that a young woman considering having a child needs to take into account that her carbon legacy, her carbon footprint over time, will increase by a factor of 6. So you see that this idea of minimizing our impact, if we take it seriously, if we take it as a principle, it is an anti-human policy. So what's happened is that the anti-human environmental philosophy has appealed to our human concerns for environmental quality, and there hasn't really been a humanist alternative in the past several decades. And so I see my goal as to offer the world a humanist environmental philosophy. And I think once you have that, you see you can and must have it all. You have industrial progress, which includes and means environmental progress. And that way you're continually transforming the planet for the better, improving nature, and improving all of your own processes to make them more productive and less dangerous.
Excellent. Before I turn to the next question, we'll kind of focus on innovation, drill down there. A couple of quick data points to support what everyone's saying. Consumer Energy Alliance, as you guys may know if you're following us at all, it's kind of a broad-based policy organization that represents the whole U.S. economy and what energy means to the rest of the economy. So right now in North America, we're tracking over 820 different anti-energy groups. These are offshore, these are onshore, these are focused on hydraulic fracturing, they're focused on pipeline and infrastructure, and in some cases they're focused on transmission lines for wind and solar. Right away, eminent domain, land use. There is an ongoing pervasive discussion in kind of the progressive side of politics in the United States focused only on the environment to the exclusion of everything else. Human poverty, shelter, clothing, food, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, it's all about the environment. So the conversation today in many political arenas, and I'll use Hillary Clinton as an example because 5-6 years ago, she was very balanced on a lot of these issues. But she's looking at some of her core base now, and she's gone very far to the progressive left. She was at one point pro-Keystone Pipeline, one point pro-Arctic energy development. Now she's completely flip-flopped on those issues because she's looking at these groups that are 820, 840 some odd national groups that are perpetually weighing in with calls to action, raising money, influencing that side of the discussion. I'm not trying to make it a left-right discussion, Republican-Democrat discussion. I'm just using it as an example of one politician that saw where part of the political discussion in this country was headed and moved in that direction. That is real time. And that's showing a politician that has fundamentally changed her position in this case over the last several years, not to the betterment of overall society. The Paris conversation did not even touch on the fact that over 1 billion people on Earth rely on wood on a daily basis to heat their homes. How can you have a moral conversation about the environment that forecloses the issue of poverty? Seems to me the conversation should be and should include both. Which takes us to the next question about innovation. When you look at things like the Keystone Pipeline, which by definition was going to be the most advanced pipeline ever constructed, safest, most efficient, most real-time data as energy was transported along the pipeline. When you look at shale energy development, Eileen, and the change in the global geopolitics of energy, the fundamental change in geopolitics around the shale revolution, and all the innovation that has occurred and is still occurring in those spaces to improve the environmental performance, improve the safety performance, improve the global employment opportunity. I wonder if you would mind, touching on that as it relates to kind of this political, philosophical dynamic and where we go from here and how do we fundamentally stake this conversation to say, hey, wait a minute. This conversation is very one-sided. And ultimately, in this presidential campaign right now, as you're talking about, 11 states voting today. It's up to all of us to kind of inject this issue into that presidential campaign a little bit. So Peggy, once again, simple question, start with you.
It's pretty interesting, actually, when you think about innovation, because I do remember the current president standing up and taking credit for the energy, the abundance of energy and how it's been transformed in the United States over the last few years. The shale innovation has been truly changing. It changed our landscape. Changed our landscape in the U.S. It changed the landscape in the world in terms of the global movement of energy, and that will continue. So that was not a momentary blip in time. That innovation occurred over a number of years, and actually the crisis that the industry is seeing now is actually only driving further the innovation and the improvements, because you got to be economic at 30, where you didn't have to be before until 60 or 80. So innovation continues. I'm of a mind that we will need all forms of energy to meet the world's energy demands, and so I don't think you have to continue to invest. Bill Gates had an interesting statistic that said the U.S. spends for 1 week of what we spend on gasoline is what the U.S. government spends on energy research. So there's not very much either in our industry or in the government spending on research, and that's what it's going to take, is continued investment. And when people talk about what used to be the riches of the industry, remember how you used to be afraid to tell people that you worked for the oil industry when everybody was making $20 billion a year? Well, what I used to tell my friends and relatives was, yeah, but we were plowing 19 billion of it back into the business. Mm-hmm. And for people that want to be on the forefront of innovation and the transition as we're going through on energy, I think the best place to be to impact that is in the industry. and working with governments to actually find the right path. There's going to continue to be innovation. I couldn't begin to pick which energy source might be the winners on new things, whether it's solar or batteries or continued evolution in the fossil fuels. What I do know is we need to continue to invest. We need to attract people in the industry, and that innovation is always been at our core. And so to address the problems going forward, the industry is going to continue to innovate and be a leader in that. And that's the case we need to make, is we are the innovators. We have done this in the past. We can continue to do it. And here's our proof points.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, absolutely, Peggy. I mean, innovation and resiliency are the cornerstones of this industry. You know, we've gone through many ups and downs. We've seen more cycles. We're more cyclical than a lot of other industries out there. And we use innovation to help us rebound each and every time. David, you talked about the hydraulic fracturing and what that's done in the shale revolution and what that's done to the energy position of the United States. And when you think about that, that's two technologies. One technology that has been around for years and years. Hydraulic fracking has been around. That's not a new technology. But what we've done over the years is made it better and better and better and better. And continuing to become better because, as Peggy said, you can do a lot at 100, but you got to figure out how to do it at 30 and 40. And that will bring on more innovation and more technology improvement in that one little area. Then they combine that with, in the very beginning, which was horizontal drilling and directional drilling, and put those two technologies together. And just that one little space in the shale revolution and what that's done, you know, many people don't remember, but the very first address that President Obama gave within the Oval Office was talking about how we was going to get this country off of fossil fuels. Fast forward 6 years later, and he made a comment in the Rose Garden, which is, I think, the one you were referring to, about how he and his policies has enabled this whole fossil fuel shale revolution. No, it isn't. It's the men and women in this industry that has made it and will continue to make it going forward. And I agree. You know, you sit here and you think about the abundance of coal around the world. And I've never worked for a coal company. Never. That's a disclaimer. But I will predict, I probably won't be here to see it, but there will be innovation and technology that will enable us to capture the energy and use the hydrocarbons in a very clean way out of coal. And we're going to do that just like we're going to use innovation and technology to capture the energy in solar and hydro and wind. And I think the use of innovation and technology is how it's going to enable us to succeed. I remember when I started this industry, as we talked about, we were afraid to say we worked for the oil and gas industry or the energy industry because we were the dinosaurs. We were, you know, we were old. We weren't cool. You come into the industry and you realize the technology and the innovation that is going on and the research. Maybe we don't have research centers like we used to, but the experimental research going on in the field every single day. We have labs all across the world, thousands and thousands of feet underwater, up in Arctic areas. I mean, those are laboratories that research is going on every day in this industry.
How many people in the room work for the oil and gas industry? How many of you in the last year have been embarrassed in a conversation to say you work for the oil and gas industry in some way? Just a few. But slowly hands are coming up. Go on, put your hand up, really. I have. I mean, I think fundamentally, I mean, both of y'all mentioned that. You know, as you're coming up, that you were at one point are felt in a larger way that there was, you couldn't admit that you worked for the energy industry or the oil and gas industry in some way.
And I think for me, David, it was in the very beginning until I really, because I believed the soundbite.
Yeah.
I believed what the media and society had told me, that this industry was bad. And when you come in, and they're a great group of men and women that want to help and want to help humankind. And we're all over the world. We're extremely diverse. But once you get in and you understand it, then you understand that, you know, hey, we all make mistakes. No one is perfect, and no industry is perfect. And what we have to do as part of that industry is help fix what's ever wrong.
I think we're in a little bit of a bubble too, because if you're in Houston, or if you're in Aberdeen, or if you're in the Middle East, where energy is such a big part of the local economy, you don't feel the attack, if you will, that you do if you go to Washington. I've been in a tremendous number of meetings with the Department of Energy, was on a couple of studies on future transportation fuels, and you see the real push against the industry, not on a let's all make it better together, but you guys are the bad guys and we want to shift the policy. And I think in Houston we don't feel that as much as if you go to the states where they're doing the anti-fracking, and the public doesn't come into contact with the industry as much as we do here or in some of the other more global centers of energy.
Alex?
Well, I live in the non-energy industry locale of Laguna Beach, California, not known as a fossil fuel hotbed or Republican hotbed or anything like that. This might seem annoying to say, but I don't have any trouble with people. And I think that that the core of it is how you view the product. Often I hear the industry talking about different ancillary aspects, like how good the people are, or do we have the right kinds of internal policies to treat everyone fairly, which is a legitimate subject that's raised at this event, or what do we do in the community and that kind of thing. But ultimately, all of that is only good if the core product is good. If this is something that is improving human life, and hopefully a lot. And I believe that it is very strongly, but I don't believe that the industry mostly believes that it is in a totally clear way. And that's why I raised the issue of moral clarity. It can be easy to frame it as, well, we understand it, of course, but the rest of the culture, don't. But I would submit that we all have been subject to the same educational system, which has given us this view that fossil fuels are an addiction that is going to destroy us by destroying the planet we live on. That's a real narrative. There's a real framework that we're all taught. And as I said, there's an alternative, the humanist environmental framework of looking at things. But we're not really taught that. Our ancestors were, but it for various reasons got abandoned. And to give the example of Keystone, look at how, just from a human perspective, look at how bizarre our view of pipelines and oil spills are. Like, if you think about just the way the world works and how we improve our lives, we obviously have to take all sorts of raw materials and transform them into usable products. Now, of all the raw materials in the world with which something can go wrong, oil should be one of the ones you hope something goes wrong with compared to the others. It's a lot better than if you're, let's say, carrying around hydrofluoric acid to mine the materials for windmills and you have a spill with that. It's not, I mean, these are, to use a cliche term, these are natural organic materials, and yet we've let the whole thing be demonized as dirty. But nature is dirty. What the industry does is refine and clean it and make it into, relatively speaking, very clean and healthy and certainly very beneficial products. So I think that I used to put as my Twitter description, I help oil companies with their self-esteem issues. And the core self-esteem issue is having been duped into viewing the core product in this negative way that doesn't apply at all to the way we view other products. If you look at all the materials that go in an iPhone and you look at all the transport challenges of that, those are a heck of a lot scarier than a pipeline. So it starts at home, though. It starts with our own thinking of this as, wow, this is an amazing process where we can take these ancient dead plants and turn them into life. I mean, you should think of oil as liquid life. And I think just if we step back and take this humanistic look at it and try to avoid being taken in by our miseducation on the subject, it just leads to a much more benevolent view of it, and consequently the ability to persuade other people in a much more relaxed and enjoyable way. Because like if you worked for a superfood company, you wouldn't have much trouble no matter where you were, because you would have confidence and you'd have the right explanations. And you work for a super fuel company, so you should feel the same way.
How many people have this? 325 kilowatt hours a year of energy, same as an Energy Star refrigerator. Education, real quick, and I see several hands. One more question, then we'll jump to you, and then I think, Katie, you might have some questions here. Well, I'm being told we have to go to y'all now.
Go ahead.
Right there in the middle.
We need a mic.
I'll walk faster than her. So can you hear me?
We can, but I don't know if they can online.
Hello? Okay.
Just say it and I'll repeat it.
So I'm part of a small group of oil and gas professionals that are based out of Southern California. And I would say I don't ever feel ashamed to work in the industry. And I notice rather than misinformation and critics in Southern California, I actually notice a lack of sophistication. So I guess my point is how much is it really, to your point about Houston being a bit of a bubble and the industry being a bit of a bubble, is the industry neglecting to educate consumers and people outside of the industry properly rather than just responding to the critics that are out there?
Great question. If you didn't hear it online, is it an issue of the industry failing to respond or educate the masses rather than just focusing on the critics that are out there? Eileen, why don't we
Yeah,
start with you?
I would agree. I absolutely would agree. And I think that we've gotten better. We're not as good as we need to be because we've helped form organizations like Consumer Energy Alliance and other organizations. We've realized, I mean, I know oil and gas companies have been working in schools where we operate, maybe in our bubble, for years. But now over the last 10 years, we've gotten more engaged and are providing educational materials, speaker bureaus, et cetera, to get out there. And, in today's world, doing blogs, Twitters, whatever we need to do in the digital media world to get the message out, or not only the message, the facts out about our industry. But it is slowly but surely making its way into the system. But should we have done more before? Yes. Do we need to continue to do more? Absolutely. But unfortunately, again, during tough economic times, as Regina said, the first thing that gets cut is training and development budgets. Well, then also your public relations budgets also get cut. And that's where the educational materials and those things come out of.
Yeah, I really don't have anything else to add.
Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, so one thing is, in terms of the cost thing, that's obviously a big thing going on right now. Let me just give you one more plug. I don't know if people have the cards, but I know people are listening online. Alex at alexepstein.com, just put pink in the subject line, because one belief that I have is that because of the way the modern world works with social media, if you create free resources, you can share them and educate the entire world. So we have lots and lots of free resources, and one of the motivations for creating them was that no matter what your budget, you can share those with a lot of people. One note, though, on the nature of education that I think is incredibly important and almost always missed, which is that whenever we talk about education, we need to be clear on the issue of purpose. And that means two things. One is, what is our purpose? What exactly do we mean by educating? Educating for what purpose? And then also, number two, what is the purpose in the minds of the listener? Because people don't just go around saying, hey, I want to get educated about fossil fuels. We wish they did, but they don't. We're always competing with many, many sources for people's attention. So there has to be some purpose in their minds, some motivation for them to get engaged. Motivation precedes education. It certainly precedes voluntary self-education. And even if you have a captive audience, motivation needs to come at the beginning to make somebody actually engage with the material. So we have to, in my view, we have to connect, therefore, the material to people's lives. And this also gets to what's the purpose of education from our perspective. From their perspective, it should be their lives. But from our perspective, it should be their lives and everyone's lives as well. What I see that often happens with quote unquote education is that it's extremely technical or often reactive, but particularly it's technical and it's just, well, here's how a well bore works, and here's how this works, and here's how that works, and let me take you on a tour of this. And those are only, I find those very interesting, but only because I know the purpose that they serve, which is to create cheap, plentiful, reliable energy to improve human life. So I think of education as educating people in the value of fossil fuels to improve human life, or more broadly, educating about the impact of fossil fuels on human life, because you also need to cover the negatives for the sake of objectivity and for the sake of persuasiveness. So I think if we orient our education around, let's explain how this product affects life, it will be much more motivating and much more persuasive.
Agree with Alex. Our philosophy for educating is it's keep it simple, stupid, and it's very programmatic. So you have education for local elected officials, state elected officials, federal elected officials, education for different consumer groups, education for the next generation, STEM-focused energy education for K through 12th graders, and then you have education kind of for the masses. Each one of those are slightly different programs, and you need to know which audience you're talking to in each of those situations. But it's very encouraging to hear in Southern California, folks in Houston tend to think of Southern California in a certain way, I would assume. But that's encouraging that you're surrounding yourself with good, honest, logical people.
Who's got the mic?
Yes, ma'am, right in the middle.
So I'm sorry. So the web, we're going to go to the web because it is just brimming. Okay, the first question we have. So this question is for Alex, and it's from Claire Phillips with GE Oil and Gas in Aberdeen. Do we fully understand the impact to the environment? Initial reports suggest that fracking could have an impact on habitat, water quality, water quantity, noise, and air pollution. However, appreciate these studies are at an early stage. Do we truly understand the effects?
It's interesting the combination of things that are blended together in that question. I don't remember them all, but I think there's water quality and noise and different things like that. So the core perspective I take with all of this is, okay, we're looking for what's best for human life. So with any of these potential negatives, we have to look at what's the magnitude of the potential negative, and then also what's the evidence for it. Is there real evidence for it? And then what's the proper action that should be taken that will maximize human well-being? So I regard it as impossible that across the board, given what we know about shale energy technology, including fracking technology, that you can't do it in extremely beneficial ways. That is, it is obvious that it is possible to do it in extremely beneficial ways. So the realm of discovery will only be, insofar as you discover negatives, it will only be particular use cases that might be damaging. But then that helps you evolve your understanding, that helps you make proper laws. That's part of the use of any technology. But we tend to have this binary view with at least fossil fuels of, oh, it's good or it's bad. And if it's imperfect in any context, therefore it should be illegal in every context. Whereas if you view it just as a normal product, you ask yourself, okay, well, fracking is one part of the process of some of this product. Are there any contexts in which it's dangerous? And obviously there are ways of doing it wrong. So at most you would just, more research is good. You just have to apply it in an objective way versus this very biased way, which is just always looking for a rationalization to ban things. Because if you're on the premise that if it's imperfect, it should be illegal, then you can argue for banning anything. So it's just a ruse. I'm not saying this is the questioner's perspective, but this is a dirty trick by the opponents of technologies to argue that to find some imperfection or alleged imperfection, they then say therefore it should be illegal. It's obviously a hypocritical thing and dishonest, and we shouldn't tolerate it at all.
Great answer. Eileen, would you?
Well, I think, I mean, as Alex said, that was a broad range of environmental impacts, and the technology from the water quality and from noise, et cetera, we have studies and articles and blogs written about how, groundwater is at 200 feet maybe below the surface, and we're injecting it 1,000 feet below, and we've got steel casing in between. And so I think that the water quality issue is, now if somebody, as Alex says, doesn't operate under standards, industry standards, and doesn't re-inject properly and just opens up their back of their truck or their pump and throws it on the ground, yeah, that's going to cause water quality damage. But just like somebody, robbing a bank is not a good thing. So, I mean, I think, those people have to be, punished and taken out of the industry and dealt with. And because we might have some issues that need to be further studied and resolved, I mean, I think the whole issue around seismic activity connected with disposal wells, we need to do more research around that. Now, originally, you're not supposed to have a disposal well near any seismic activity, but they have been placed there. But you place properly, you can dispose of great quantities and the volumes that they are. So there are things that need to be done, but with every product and every venture, there is something we need to continue, and technology is going to help us get there.
One specific answer to the question, and then a more general point. I was with a Nature Conservancy fellow at a fracking site. This was probably 3 or 4 years ago. And he was the water expert, I was not. And he said there was no way that it was going to impact the water table. Coming from Nature Conservancy, I was pretty impressed. But they are scientists. And I do think that the general point is we always continue to learn and adapt. Yes. If you'll remember a few years ago, renewable fuel standard. Best thing since sliced bread. We were going to go green. We were going to use our own energy sources, corn ethanol. Studies have proven that is, one of the worst things you can do from the environmental standpoint. And yet the government has chosen so far not to recognize that science has progressed. We better understand that that's not the answer to our energy future. So I believe that we probably don't know all we need to know about shale. Will we continue to know more? Yes. Will they then continue to adapt? Yes.
All right. So, wow, this is a doozy. Hi from Pittsburgh. Hey, Pittsburgh. For the panel, so this is for anyone, we would be curious to hear your thoughts on the energy positions of the presidential candidates. Love you guys.
Wow.
I'm sorry. Love yous guys. maybe that's one for you, Eileen.
From Pittsburgh, it sounds like it's the whole city together.
It sounds like they're all together now. So anybody want to jump on that one?
Pennsylvania is a key state in this election.
So it sounds like they're interested in knowing.
We could be here all day talking about that.
I would say from a broad energy perspective, recognizing diverse energy resources, oil, natural gas, nuclear, hydro, renewables. Rubio has staked out a pretty good, of the candidates that are left, Rubio has staked out a pretty good position. Trump, like many of his positions, I think is evolving. We're told, and we've had some conversations with some of his staff, believe it after today, but we're told that some of his bombastic statements and kind of the personality that he's affecting is going to change after today. That's what we're told. So his energy position, like many of his positions, I think, is evolving. We talked about the Clinton position that has evolved, frankly, over what we've seen her say in the past to what she's saying now. Drilling on federal lands, she's kind of at a rope line recently said we should really take a hard look at all fossil energy production on federal lands, coming on the heels of the president's statement at the State of the Union, where he said we're going to ban all coal energy development on federal lands. So she's kind of tracking to that progressive state position. The Alberta Clipper, which is kind of the new Keystone pipeline to bring oil sands from Canada to the United States. Both Clinton and Sanders have come out very strongly opposed to the Alberta Clipper line. Sanders has come out kind of very philosophically opposed to a lot of pipelines, frankly, which is interesting coming from the Northeast. He, more so than many of them, should understand that if you're not going to build new nuclear plants and you're not going to extend the life of a coal plant and you're going all in on natural gas, then you, by definition, have to build more pipelines. So I think in the Northeast and in Florida, we're setting ourselves up in particular to be those regions of the United States are going to be the forerunner of maybe difficulties we see in other parts of the nation because particularly in the Northeast, it is very difficult to get new pipelines permitted. And they don't have any other energy resource choice. Kasich has been pretty good on all energy resources. He has, in the state of Ohio, has advocated for more severance taxes on hydraulic fracturing and energy development. So you would see, by extension, if he were elected or he were the nominee, you might look at more energy taxes from his perspective. But in terms of being balanced for energy, he's pretty good. Cruz is probably, based on his statements, on diverse energy and fossil energy has been the strongest. Coming from the state of Texas, you would kind of understand that's where he's been. He's authored some energy bills that have been, fairly broad-minded, but more slanted toward the fossil energy side. So without taking an hour to explain everything, that's the general point for all the key candidates. But from a Republican-Democrat perspective, it's along the lines of a little bit of the debate that we've characterized here. It's whether or not it's energy and the environment, or whether it's just the environmental side. And I think we need to flip that debate and encourage all presidential candidates to look at energy and the environment, including energy diversity, including energy conservation, which we never talked about today, including energy efficiency. Because the cleanest barrel of oil, frankly, as we all know, is that barrel of oil we don't use. We can continue to be more energy efficient and conserve more. And that needs to be part of all the platforms. So we actually are talking to several of the candidates on energy policy and kind of educating them from the CEA perspective on what it means for the whole economy. And we'll continue to do that. But I mean, Alex has mentioned it. I think all of us have mentioned it. This is a critical election for energy policy in this country. And I think we can vote right downstairs, hopefully. Katie, just set that up. Any other perspectives, anything else?
I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
we covered it.
I'm very passionate about this topic. So one thing that Megan said, and I think I'm a fracturing expert. So I've gone through Stein and Poland and Australia to take what the U.S. has done for regulation, and that's how Poland and Australia made their shale exploration regulation from the U.S. The problem I have with our industry is we don't transfer the messages right. Either we dumb them up, like we make them dummy cartoons that people have Googled and they don't like that, or we get defensive when there is an issue. And when we answer, and I've seen it in Spain, for example, we go there, oh no, we're going to put 99% water and 1% sand. And I stood up and said, no, maybe I'm going to use gel because I don't know the formation. And this is the chemical I'm going to use. Halliburton gave all the disclosure. And yes, and they were, oh, okay. It was better than saying, no, we're not going to use any chemicals. That's our problem in the industry. we get defensive in fracturing or shales. And with America, I mean, I'm very proud of that. I learned all my experience in America. And Americans are naive in a way. They don't stand up to the word and say, you know what, Saudi, you learn shale because we did shales here.
Yep.
You are recruiting the people who are working on shale. They're all North American.
Right.
American, correct?
Yep.
We don't do that. We don't go to the UK and Poland and said all the regulation you guys have came from the DEP in Marcellus or the Texas Railroad Commission. That's how you built your shale gas or even your oil and gas regulation. You took our regulation. We don't stand up. EOG or I don't know, Devon, it's not working. So,
but I think it's a great point. You know, industry pride and
Yeah.
you didn't hear it? So
No.
the key points, we need to take pride in our industry. You know, the United States, from the regulatory standpoint, Pittsburgh, Texas, other states have led on shale regulation, and now it's being emulated the rest of the world. The second key point is she finds that a lot of discussions where industry is leading a discussion with a government official or others, we're overly defensive sometimes, or we're not providing the level of information that those officials need. I think all valid, hopefully that's a good characterization of your statement, but I think all valid points. I don't know if anyone.
We got a question up there.
Wait, David. Oh,
Alex?
David,
Yeah, go ahead.
can you hear me? I can't hear you.
Yes.
Can I jump in for a second? Okay. I apologize. I have to go in 2.5 minutes. So I just want to make 1.5 comments on the election question, which I've been very involved in. So I think of it a little bit differently. You can look at it from the perspective of which candidates have the best or least bad policies, which is important. But insofar as one side, I think, has dramatically better policies, in general, my foremost concern is, will they have the messaging and the arguments and the case that can do two things? One is inspire people about the amazing opportunities we have for energy development in this country that are very much under attack. And then two is reassure people about the environmental concerns that they have, particularly the climate concern. And on this issue, I think the candidates have done a very bad job. And I think they should think a lot about how to do it properly. And no, I've spent a lot of my free time just trying to reach out and voluntarily help the campaigns with this kind of thing, because I think it's just life and death to be able to make energy a winning issue, which it could be, as against a losing issue, which it usually is for the advocates of energy. And then one final thought just on how I think about environmental issues and the framework that I use, because it is different. So I will say I don't like the expression that David cited about conservation and the cleanest barrel of oil is the one we don't use, because if we take that to its logical conclusion, well, then we'd be a cleaner world if we had never used oil. But no, we'd be a much dirtier world if we never used oil. So oil is a healthy thing, and part of what it does is clean up the world. So I don't think of conservation as an ideal. Now, efficiency is an ideal, but in the service of maximizing human well-being. So I don't like this idea that we'll use too much energy. As Robert Bryce says, I use just the right amount of energy, and I look forward to a world where I can use a lot more, because that means I'll have a better life and a better environment, and certainly billions more people around the world need that. So I hope that that framework will be helpful to you. I think it can help you really become an influencer. If you want to contact me again, alex@alexepstein.com, and I really appreciate the chance to be here today. Thank you.
Alex, thank you so much. We also have in the audience, everyone, the Stay in Touch card. So you fill this out and you get one of these really nifty pins. I'm wearing it. It says, I love fossil fuels. Thank you for joining us from, oh, there we go. Show it. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us from DC today. So we appreciate it, and we appreciate the panel.